Hey, you party people, it's Ned Crash. Welcome to Ned Consumes the World, Episode 0, a new podcast that I'm starting, me being Ned, this being a podcast. Pretty straightforward. Happy to have you here with me today for the beginning of a journey. A podcast about games, music, and culture. I've wanted to do a podcast for a long time, like probably going back to 2014 or so. And I don't know if you're anything like me, but even though I've wanted to do one, there's some sort of mental block or excuse that's always kept me from actually just sitting down to do it. I've got that trait where I want everything that I do to be perfect and high quality, plan it out, get it right. And those of us who deal with that often end up just doing nothing out of a sort of preparation stagnation, if that makes sense. I've gone back and forth over the years on what I wanted a podcast to be about, but there's one sort of running theme that's been with me all along, and that's games, music, and culture. And I'll get into more of what that means in a bit, but that's the topic that I've settled on. So let's talk about timing. Why now? Why all of a sudden? Well, this little game called Godforge has come along and sucked me into the community like a Kansas Twister. And using that analogy, it does sort of feel a little Oz-like now that I think about it, that the doing just sort of started happening and the thinking had to be reined in. I've landed in this magical land with this crew at Fateless, the company that's making Godforge, and they're fostering a very healthy and collaborative content creator community. And they've really been incredible in helping to push me along into getting my YouTube channel going and just starting something. I would say the only way the timing could be better is if I had started yesterday. So this is episode 0. Now, why start with a 0 and not a 1? I know that's kind of silly, but I want this episode to be both a technical learning experience for me on how to record, how to upload, how to get all the cards in a row, but also I want it to be kind of a time capsule of sorts. There's no interview today, it's just me. And in the future, I do want to do a lot of interviews, but this is an opportunity to almost journal the experience of kicking the whole thing off. Maybe in the future we can have fun looking back at this. That's my hope. What do I want this podcast to be? Probably mostly interviews. I love meeting people. I love learning about people who've made their contributions to culture over time, documenting it all for our benefit as this world we live in speeds up and starts to forget things faster and faster. I think gaming especially can often be a snapshot, especially when compared to music. But there's also so much good music out there that nobody's ever heard or heard of. I think there's probably a short-term and a long-term vision for this podcast. Long-term, it's certainly not just going to be about any one game or one band or one culture. But in the short term, it's definitely going to be heavily Godforge and content creator focused as we kick this journey off together. And again, with this wonderful community that's helping push me along to do this. So what do the topic breakdowns look like? In terms of games, I literally mean anything that's a game. I want it to be as broad as possible. Obviously, we're going to talk about video games. I've been a gamer for such a long time. I mean, going all the way back to, Super Mario on regular Nintendo, and then original Final Fantasy on regular Nintendo, I think is probably the game that made me more of a shut-in than I should have been my rest of my life. But I like talking with people heavily immersed in any sort of games, sports, tabletop, card games, party games, really anything that means. A group of people having fun together, right? Both players and creators, I might add. And then in terms of music, music has equally been a major part of my life since the first guitar I got in middle school. I've been in and out of bands and solo projects since high school. I've been heavily involved in multiple music scenes, and I was really lucky to be in Denver during one of the most incredible local music scenes the country has ever seen between 2008 and 2014. just what an incredible time looking back at what we were able to do as a music scene and provide for each other and see in the quality. And it really came out of a love for the music and the scene and not trying to get famous. I think that is what made it special, especially in sort of a geographically isolated part of the country where it was, an 8-hour drive to go to some other large city with a venue, right? So I really want to draw on the relationships that I built over time, the musicians that I've grown to love over time, and I hope to grow the podcast large enough to ultimately interview long-standing important names in the industry. And what better thing to ask a musician than, hey, what games do you play? And what better thing to ask a gamer than, hey, what music are you listening to? That's maybe what's going to make this interesting, I think. Now, the big topic, though, the big sort of elephant in the room is culture. What do I mean by that? The giant gray area, the ultimate broad topic. What do I mean by culture? If you look up the word culture, you'll see something to the effect of the collective arts and intellectual manifestations of humanity. Or something like customs, arts, and social constructs of nations, peoples, and social groups. Sometimes when we say culture, we think about it as a thing to do in a place. Like, for instance, I'm going to go to Mexico and eat squash blossom soup. That's cultural. Or I'm going to go to Spain to run with the bulls. That's cultural. But culture is so much more broad than that. It really is the manifestation of all we do and believe as humans. We tend to revere old culture, and we don't even realize we're creating new culture every day. I mean, think about emojis in Discord, Pepe and Doge faces, cartoonified reactions from your favorite actor or scene. Think about the new language that comes from new generations, things like based, on God, kek. All of this is culture. And I think the most important thing about culture is not only understanding it, but understanding its value to the people from whom it's derived. I'll give you a personal example. For a long time, especially starting at a moment that I can remember vividly in high school, I wanted to play capoeira. I saw it on TV. I saw these people doing flips and cartwheels and, high kicks at each other. And I had been involved in taekwondo a lot. But when I saw that, I just thought, what is that? It was alien. It was amazing. And I finally got the opportunity to play with a number of different groups in Mexico, in New Orleans, in Denver. And I ended up playing capoeira for years. I became immersed in Afro-Brazilian culture that I would have otherwise never known anything about. And to know how important and valuable it is to the peoples who manifested it is to know so many things. It's how to fight, how to hide, how to sing, how to have community, how to trust and how to deceive. And as rich and interesting as that one piece of the puzzle is, that's just it, right? That's just one piece. Culture is so much bigger than any one culture, the concept at least. So I want to learn more about all the interesting things that we've come together to do and how that's been important to everyone that I get to talk to, hopefully, on this show. Now, disclaimer, it is possible that it could cross the line into politics. But don't get me wrong, I don't necessarily want this piece of the show to become political. Honestly, I don't want the show to become political. But there is a saying that's gone around for the past, 10 years or so that I've been hearing, and that saying is, politics is downstream from culture. Obviously, if we say that the intellectual manifestations of a nation or people, one of those manifestations is political in nature. So we can't hide from it, but I don't want this show to be a political show. I think that we already have a lot of very smart voices out there doing shows specifically around politics, and I think it really requires, at least half, if not all of your time to dedicate to that. So while I say that I don't want this show to go that far, if it does start to cross the line, I want to stay focused on the cultural piece, which influences the politics rather than any sort of stance or solution. So we can stop the topic there. Games and music themselves are simply cultural constructs. So it should always feel pretty good to have topic comprehensive conversations around these three buckets, you know? Are you interested in what games your favorite musician plays? Are you interested in how the Aztecs came up with Olamalitzli? I think that's how you say it. Or what about your favorite content creator? How do they choose music for their videos? You know, that's the headspace I occupy, thinking about these things, talking to people about these things, learning about these things. And it's the world that I want to continue to consume. For the episode today, we'll do a quick test on the three topics with just some of what's been going on in my life lately. So, obviously, if you're watching this on YouTube, we're seeing footage from this, and it's easy to talk about because it's the topic du jour. Gaming-wise, Godforge. So what is Godforge for anybody who's listening to this who isn't already immersed in it? Godforge is an upcoming gacha/hero collector game created by a group of people who know and love that genre. Why that's important? It's that a lot of these games are sort of veiled cash grabs. They often have compelling gameplay and deep strategy, but just as often they beat their players up with the need to spend to stay relevant. They also start to feel like jobs over time. Despite being an enjoyable genre in their own way, they can make you do a lot of work, and you may have also heard this saying, I like a game that respects my time. They can make you spend way too much time in-game. It's a metric that their bean counters pay attention to, honestly. And I know Godforge is going to pay attention to that metric, but I have faith that this group cares more about the player than maybe any other hero collector game that's ever been created. The most famous game in that genre, at least in the current landscape, is, of course, Raid: Shadow Legends. And many of the creators of Godforge were content creators themselves for Raid. One of the things that struck me about Raid back when I was playing it was the rich community of people who made content and facilitated said community. I'll never forget, there's a guy named Saffron Man, and he even created a live community awards show that streamed to Twitch. It was incredibly ambitious. They had prepared skits and musical acts. They had cameos. Obviously, they had community-focused awards, things like the best shard pull reaction. There was a Christmas special baked into one of their presentations. It was a ton of fun, and I think it about broke him to pull it off, honestly. But that passion and dedication to really push the limits of what a gaming community could do for a mobile game, it's what really makes this group special. A lot of the people involved in Godforge, for instance, participated or won awards during the Raid Community Awards. So I'm very interested to see how Godforge shakes out. And the crew has been gracious enough to help me on my journey to create and run a YouTube channel. So keep an eye out for the beta coming up soon. Obviously, I'll be covering it. Music-wise, I recently, discovered, it's always a funny word to use. It's when you discover something, not that something is discovered. Maybe it's always been there. But using that word, I discovered a band recently that I was completely unaware of called Town Portal. For the gamers out there, I think that you will note the homage to ARPGs, most likely Diablo, Path of Exile. But Town Portal is, I think, a Danish band that is an instrumental three-piece. And I'm really big into the progressive rock genre and the math rock genre. In college, I was introduced to the godfather of math rock, even though they hate the term, Don Caballero. And that really changed me musically moving forward in what I was trying to work on. Town Portal is, a practical evolution of that, where it doesn't necessarily have to get more complicated or more crazy or more unlistenable. It can be more enjoyable, more listenable, and an appreciation for the craft can be baked into what they're doing from a technical perspective. I was talking to Christian Dunn of L1011 recently, and he said something that kind of struck me, especially coming from him. If you know anything about Il 1011, it's a instrumental two-piece that it's not necessarily mathy or super progressive, but obviously those influences are there. It's definitely more ambient listening in a way. I hope I'm not saying anything that would make Christian unhappy with the way that I describe his music, but the very first time I ever met him, I brought up Don Cab, and he smiled. This time, when I saw him with Damon Chi, I asked him about it, and he said he hates that term math rock, and he hates the genre or dislikes it for the reason that to him it feels like it's always showing off. And I tried to think through that because I have a very, very different view on that style of music. Frequently, if I'm at a show and there's a very talented progressive band, you might see me smiling or, having some sort of weird head nod or dance, especially in moments. I might cheer when I hit certain moments in a song. And I think that if you look at something like Chan, I can agree with him. I think something like that is really showing off. It's so polished and it's so about the technical mastery of what they're doing that the music can potentially get lost. Even if it's a nice melody, it just can get lost behind, look at what I can do. And that's where I would agree with him. Where I would differ, though, I mean, obviously he's playing music with Damon, is something like Town Portal, where, yes, something technical is happening, but they're enjoying what they're doing. And you can make jokes with music. If you listen to Don Cab, especially, old albums, it's funny. It's technically masterful, yes, but it's funny. What they do with the music to have fun and be silly and then bake that into a composed piece, it's really incredible. What is it, Palm Trees in the Fecking Bahamas? He's got the bass line from Earth, Wind, and Fire. It took me years to figure that out until one day I heard Earth, Wind, and Fire on the radio, and I was like, wait, what? It's stuff like that, homages, silliness, having fun with the music. That's what I love about a good progressive or math rock band. Town Portal, killing it. They sounded to me a lot like Dysrhythmia, where when Dysrhythmia's catchphrase is, no breakdowns, no dancing, no fun, Town Portal is breakdowns, dancing, and fun, but with that same sort of audio quality and that same sort of choppy composition. So if you don't know any of these bands, but you do find yourself attracted to progressive rock, post-punk, math rock, check all those bands out, right? Dysrhythmia, Don Cab, El 1011, and especially Town Portal. I've really been enjoying their music since I heard it recently. And that kind of gets us into that cultural topic. That's where that blend is, right? Is there's a culture around progressive rock. And to me, that culture has a lot to do with silliness and having fun, much more than it has to do with technical mastery. Because technical mastery can send you down a path that, can make you sound more like avant-garde jazz, or getting into the Steve Vai world, or even Dragon Force, right? Like, what am I physically capable of doing as a musician versus the silliness of a group of people having fun together and throwing inside jokes into their music. That's what I really love. And I think that that's culture, right? That's a certain culture of that kind of music. So I don't want this first episode to be too long. The future episodes are going to be much longer, I'm sure, especially when I'm able to interview people. So keep an eye out for that. But we'll cut it short today. Keep it sweet. Hopefully you listened all the way through. If you're watching this on YouTube, give it a like and subscribe. I'm going to try to get some logos, some intro and outro music, some animation screens, all the stuff you're supposed to do. I'm going to try to get that together. And one thing I'll say is that for the future of all my channels, as a longtime musician who has been involved in so many music scenes, I want to only use local music and musicians I know, their music. So you're never going to hear something that's really mainstream play on this channel. In fact, I think, 1% of the listener base will often even recognize any of the music that's playing. So good on you if you do. Let me know if you know what a song was, if you hear it. And I love people calling out references. Anyway, have a great rest of your week. tune back in for episode 1, and you'll hear me say it again later, but peace!